Hi, I'm Ethan. I love muzzleloading. Today we're talking with custom knife maker Steve Auvenshine about his history in muzzleloading and black powder, his extension into accoutrements, and then how that led him to being on the set of more than 10 Hollywood productions here as an industry prop maker, black powder armorer, and just all-around handyman for historical media. Steve, thank you so much for coming onto the show. Really excited to talk with you here tonight. So how did you get your start then in muzzleloading and the associated crafts?
I guess it started from just a love of shooting at the base.
Okay.
I was a competitive shooter from maybe 9 or 10 years old. I shot in NRA competitions.
Okay.
And we'll make that part of the story very short. I like shooting of all kinds. And then I had been given a CDA kit for Christmas or birthday or something at some point. And it was still in the box many, many years later. And I moved to Bourbon County, Kentucky, with the Kentucky State Police. I had been stationed in Eastern Kentucky and then got transferred to Bourbon County. And I ran into Wayne Estes.
Oh, okay.
Many of your listeners will know the name.
Yep.
He's from here in Paris, fine gun builder. I got to know him. Well, I think he had a crime I had to investigate, and I did that, and it was quite involved. So I got to know him a little bit, and I think I recovered some property for him.
Okay.
And it happened to be muzzleloaders that were stolen. And so I got some of that back, and then so we got to know each other.
Yeah.
And I got to see his shop and hang out a little bit. And I said, well, I've got this kit. Do you think you could help me build it up? He was good. He didn't say, get that out of my shop. We put it together, and then of course, what happens after you have that,
right?
Well, now you got to build another one.
Can't have just one.
So I, with his help, we built a nice short-barreled hunting rifle in walnut, and I still use it to deer hunt today.
Okay. You said it's kind of short. What caliber? What kind of furniture are we talking?
It's a 58 caliber. I want to say it's like a 38-inch barrel, 36-inch barrel. And I shoot mini balls out of it.
Okay.
535 grain mini ball. Well, there's not a deer in North America that can stop it. And it shoots very well. And I have no problem taking it to the woods. It's heavy, but it's short. I later put a sling on it, and it's a tool. It works.
Right.
It works every time. Knock on wood, I don't think it's ever clatched on me for a deer. And of course, I'm probably more particular when I'm deer hunting about, my flint and powder is everything dry, everything good shape, that I am at the range. Because I don't want that clatch, but it's always worked, and harvested a lot of deer with that gun.
That's wonderful.
Been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, that's how I was introduced to the Kentucky Corps Long Rifleman. Great bunch of guys. Of course, they have that interstate shoot every October at Fort Boonesboro. Started going to Friendship. And in the first little bit, this was probably 91. I had mentioned that I've always liked to make things. This term maker is huge now. And I don't think we called ourselves that back in 91, but I enjoyed making things, whatever that was. I just did it. And I wanted to make knives.
Okay.
That was something I was always interested in. I had always collected knives. And I had always loved history. And that was part of the thing that I loved about the muzzleloading hobby was you can dive in as deep as you want to into the history of it.
Yeah.
You can just shoot. You can just shoot inlines. Whatever. There's something in it for everybody. and I loved history, and especially Kentucky history. So it was a perfect mix for me. And then I saw these handmade knives going to rendezvous. I went to a couple Easterns, and I was like, well, there's people out here making knives. I like to make stuff, and there's knives. So
kind of put two and two together there.
It was kind of a no-brainer. It might have been a slow burn for the light bulb to come on, but it did come on eventually. And I asked Duane about that, and he said, well, I know a guy. And he lives in Woodbury, Kentucky. And so the next thing I know, I'm in Frank House's shop, and he's teaching Duane and I how to make knives. And
that's the kind of guy Duane is. You know, he sees an interest, and then he'll start hauling you to the best of the best where you can learn and figure this stuff out.
Yeah, and who better than Frank House, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So we went, and I think I went back maybe a couple more times on my own. And I tell this a lot. Frank's been very supportive, and he and I are good friends, and we work several movies together, and we talk pretty regularly. But on one particular time, after I had started forging and making knives, I had a suitcase full. And Frank came in for a hammer in. We had it Duane's. It was, I don't know, snow was probably 2 feet deep, and we had paths to the forge, and Duane had a little cabin we built out back of his house, and we were in there, I think, watching a UK basketball game. And man, I was chomping at the bit to show Frank my suitcase of knives. And so I finally saw my time, halftime or something, and I brought out my suitcase, my little case, and I opened that thing up, and I said, Frank, look, I've been making knives. I felt like that little foghorn leghorn. I felt like that little chicken that followed him around. Look what I did. And Frank looked at him, and he was polite, which he is to his students when they're in front of other people. And he said, oh yeah, that's nice. And so I asked him a few questions. He said, yeah. He said, it's good, Steve. It's good. He said, you've proven to me that you can make knives. He said, now prove to me you're a knife maker.
Ooh, okay.
And that was all he said. And I shut my little case up, and we watched the rest of the game. Well, I studied on that quite a bit, and I started to understand what he was talking about. Mm-hmm. And so I noticed that Frank, when he was building a gun, he studied that maker. He studied that rifle, and he didn't often make bench copies, but he would take inspiration from makers, and he studied that stuff. And I said, well, all right. He didn't get where he is by being stupid. So I started buying books and borrowing books, and actually went to the local library here, and I had them bring some in. And that really opened my eyes. If I was going to make period knives, I need to understand what a period knife looked like, and how it felt, and what people did with them.
So were you like getting books in that were, kind of original accounts and journals and things, or were these like collections of knives and other accoutrements? What kind of books were you searching for at this stage?
Both. Okay. Actually, I think I could say that. I love, the standard knife books that we all have, American Primitive Knives, the Menace book, Grant's book, what is that, Knife and Homespun, America?
Yeah, sounds right.
Those are the Bibles. But, you know, I was also reading a lot of history on flintlocks and that kind of thing.
I'm just kind of getting familiar with the era.
Yeah. More of that than anything else, probably.
Okay.
I like Ron Illard's books. You know, just anything I could absorb that might help me down the road.
Yeah. I get you.
And I didn't do it like I was studying in school. I did it because it was fun. You know, I like that stuff. And so I got a little more in tune with what a period knife should look like, what it should feel like, and not try to make it like what you might see at a tourist stop in Montana.
Right.
You know, something that actually works and feels good. And then, you know, Frank is an artist, and he is, and you'll understand this, the flow and the balance, how a knife or anything would look from one end to the other. There was a time period there when I was tearing pictures out of magazines of new cars.
Okay.
And looking at the stylistic cues from them. Like, if you look at the brand new Corvette, if that's not a knife screaming to be made, I'll eat your hat. I mean, every time I see one of those, I think, man, I got to get a picture of that and get that done. I mean, people spend a lot of time and money creating interesting shapes and looks, and you know, there's a reason we like it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what, if I could say anything to a new knife maker, is learn that stuff.
Yeah.
Not just the heat treat and temper. You got to know that stuff.
It kind of goes back into, I think about it as like middle school, high school art class kind of things, where it seems really basic, but when you start looking at something like this and these accoutrements and the rifles and things, even down to the clothing at times, those same design principles are there. You know, and you can go back and forth on whether or not people were trained, you know, especially in the 18th century, depending on the trade and the skill that they were executing. But there are those design principles that exist in art that exist for a reason. And I really like that you brought up cars, because whether you're looking at a car, a knife, a bag, or a gun, or a house even, there are those core design principles that make it look good. And if those are off, your eye knows it. You know,
right.
There's a feeling there that we all kind of have. While art is subjective, there's some core stuff out there that I believe it's right or it's wrong. Not that it's bad, but when it's right, it's like, oh man, that is tight.
Well, people have heard me say this many times in many articles, but I have two principles in my knife making. When I make a knife, it either needs to either look mean or sexy. Okay. And if you can do both of those, you're onto something. The other thing is, I want people to, and of course I'm knocking on wood because now people are going to walk by my table and look at me and
start pointing stuff out.
Yeah, or not. But I want people, when they walk by my table, to see a knife. It may not be every one, but I want them to see one of them and go, oh, that's cool. I got to pick that up. Okay. I want that visceral reaction. They may not know why they like it. Hell, I may not know why I like it.
Right. Yeah. There's kind of a mystical element to this. While it can be studied and practiced, there is still that kind of magic, to say, for lack of a better term, to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. When it's right, it's right. Yeah. And that's when we look at paintings by David Wright, or, well, I don't want to leave out anybody's name. Right. But that genre, Griffin and Buxton and I can go on and on and on. That it's right and you love it. But what you don't know is there's probably half a dozen basic art principles that they used in that thing to make me feel that way.
Yeah.
And, it's simple as, I like photography. It's simple as the rule of thirds.
Mm-hmm.
That a mountain leads into the picture, not out of the picture.
Yeah.
If you're taking a picture of a horse race, you want more space in front of the nose of the horse and not the back of it. He needs to be running into the picture. Well, the same thing with knives. It needs to flow. When you look from one end to the other, you don't want your eye to stop. It needs to be continuous and look like it was intentional.
I really like that. I think that's something that I don't think we've talked a whole lot about on the podcast here. And, I'm a big fan of like those beginner principles, and that's what I try to talk about. And well, I hope that, people that are seasoned and really enjoy muzzleloading and the accoutrements can enjoy the program as well. Those beginner principles are something that I think that all of us can go back to and brush up on. I find myself, especially during the winter, returning to my sketchbook and practicing those basic things that I've been practicing for years now. And there's a kind of warm homeliness to that, I guess. I mean, it's returning to that and kind of starting over, but not really starting over. Just kind of a refresher before I go into kind of the year.
Oh, absolutely. And even, going back to your sketchbook, let's say that you don't have a project going for 2 or 3 weeks and you're sketching, you're doodling, whatever it is. When you get on a bag, then let's say, or you're scrimshawing a horn, you may not know it, but that practice and that eye and that thought, it carries over.
Mm-hmm.
And, it might be the shape of the flap. It might be whatever.
And it's the same thing I would say with shooting. If you're going out and you want to get better with your rifle, putting a wood flint in your jaws and dry firing in the house, you're going to figure things out while you're doing that you're going to be able to take to the range. And each time you're at the range, when you go out and practice and you go to a competition, your brain's going to be working on that stuff from that practice and applying it without you really even thinking about it.
Oh, absolutely. I was on the UK rifle team while I was at UK, and I shot probably a truckload of 22 rounds, but I probably dry fired that much as well.
Right.
And it's putting in the repetition, it's putting in the practice, muscle memory. There's muscle memory in knife making. When you do a thing and you've done it enough, you don't have to think about it. It's easier, it's cleaner. It carries over into all we do like that.
So for you, when you're making something just, kind of for yourself, what does that process look like? Now you're at a point where probably you have kind of a mental library built up where you don't necessarily need to return to the research each and every time. But say you have, a period of time where you can kind of work on something that you want to work on. What's that process look like?
Well, honestly, that doesn't happen very often.
Right. I think we all want more of that, but don't really get it.
I wish it did. Yeah. I do. I have been blessed with some clients or customers that have said, make what you want to make. I want something and I don't care what it is. Well, it's a two-sided coin. It's fun. It's exciting. It's also scary.
Right.
Because now it's like put your money where your mouth is.
Yeah.
Somebody has given you a blank check, said okay, and a blank canvas, right? Make something cool that you've never done. That's really exciting, but dang, it's intimidating too. And so if, now if somebody says that to me, I'm probably going to either look at a Bowie knife or a folder.
Okay.
One of those two. And, you know, and then I'm going back to the books. You know, I've read and studied a lot about Bowie knives. I've went to Dr. James Batson's seminar, who is probably the Bowie knife expert in the country. And certainly it's at least debatable that he is.
Right.
And, you know, so I've still got a lot to learn. I sure like doing them. And I like being able to take my time on a piece and feel good about taking that time to do it right and do it pretty cool.
So do you work a lot in a sketchbook? Are you sketching things out, or are you working more in 3-dimensional space when you're kind of blocking something out?
No, I do sketch it out. And something I started, I don't know when the first one was. It's been a lot of years now. I do watercolors.
Oh.
And I'm not very good at it, I'll be honest.
That's okay.
But I like it. Yeah. And but what started it was a prop master said, "Okay, I need a knife for this. Can you come up with something, send me a sketch, and let's look at it?" And so I did a watercolor and sent them the thing, and they loved it. They could see it. They could see the colors and the handles. And, you know, may have got me that job. I don't know. But I started doing that. So now for prop masters, when they want a prop, usually it's a knife, I'll do a watercolor and send them the watercolor. And I enjoy it. I think they like it. Mm-hmm. It's kind of fun for me.
Yeah. I love watercolor. It's my favorite painting medium. So I love to hear that, hear you say that. That's great.
It's fun. And Bryant White, artist, he kind of got me started. I think we were at a show. Where were we? I guess we were at Gettysburg at a show. And I started talking about that I had done this, and so he sat down. He had a little watercolor set. He sat down with me at the show, and we started painting.
Wow.
And, you know, how cool is that?
Yeah, that's awesome.
And then my daughter was there, and she talked to him, and behind my back, and got kind of a list of things I needed for Christmas. So,
okay. That's very sweet of her.
Yeah, it was. It was really cool. So, after that, I was stuck. I don't do it a lot, but I do it enough.
This podcast is brought to you by Muzzleloader Magazine, the publication for traditional black powder shooters. Since 1974, Muzzleloader has been the leading magazine devoted to traditional black powder hunting and shooting. Each issue is jam-packed with articles on hunting, shooting, gunsmithing, do-it-yourself projects, living history, American history, book and product reviews, and much, much more. Muzzleloader Magazine is the best traditional muzzleloading magazine, bar none. I'd like to thank Jason at Muzzleloader Magazine for his continued support of I Love Muzzleloading and the I Love Muzzleloading podcast. I don't care what you're into. If you're interested in muzzleloading, this is the kind of magazine I think you need to check out. I've been a fan of Muzzleloader Magazine even before the sponsorship. I've always been impressed with what Jason has been able to put out with Muzzleloader Magazine, and it really means a lot for him to be supporting I Love Muzzleloading and our efforts over here. Thank you, Muzzleloader Magazine, for your support. This podcast is brought to you by Thor Bullets. I've talked about Thor Bullets for over a year now, and I'd like to thank them again for their sponsorship. I have since, in this amount of time, went out and tested these bullets on my range. I have not gone hunting with them, but in my penetration testing and my accuracy testing with my CVA Accura LRV2, I have to say that the Thor hammer bullets sized to my bore for that Accura do a phenomenal job. I have sub 1-inch groups at 100 yards if I do what I'm doing right with the rifle. Really can't speak highly enough of these bullets. I think you should try them, not just because they're supporting the show, but because they are performing really well in the tests that I am doing. I also want to say real quick here that they have come out with their Thor muzzleloader practice bullets. These are a 50 caliber 230 grain saboted lead bullet for you to get out. It's a little bit of a cheaper option for you to get out and shoot your muzzleloader, practice with your muzzleloader a little bit more, and in general, get more familiar with your muzzleloader without using the Thor patented, hunting premium bullets that we've been talking about here for a while. So that's something for you to check out, something for you to consider. There's a lot of muzzleloader bullets out there, but really can't thank Thor enough for their support of I Love Muzzleloading. And, talking with the guys over at Thor, the mission and the kind of people that they are, they're really the kind of people that I will continue to support through my lifetime and my muzzleloading career, apart from the sponsorship. They've done right by me, and it's been a lot of fun working with them. So check out Thor Bullets. Not really a structured ad read here, but I hope that you check out maybe some of the practice bullets they've got. And as you're planning for your fall 2022 hunts here, check out some of the Thor hammer bullets. We've talked a little bit here about kind of what goes into making your personal work. How does that contrast with making work for these Hollywood productions? You're talking about sending these watercolor sketches out. Is there much of a difference between when you are making something for a customer or client in Hollywood, or are these Hollywood prop designers and leaders there, are they just kind of a different kind of customer for you?
Yeah, it's completely different.
Okay.
You really have to check your ego at the door. Well, for instance, you know how we are. We like to tell war stories. So I did the knife for Jumanji that The Rock was going to carry. And the prop master called me and said, "Hey, I'm going to send you a picture of a knife that the art director has approved, and we like it." It was a computer rendering of a knife that they had, taken the blade off this one, the guard off this one, the handle from something. They said, "Can you make this?" And I said, "Sure, I can do that. That's in my wheelhouse." It was a Bowie, about 11, 12 inches. And I said, "Yeah." I said, "I can do that." So they said, "All right." We worked out a contract for 3 knives, and I had 4 weeks to do it. And so I finished a knife and had 2 more well on the way in 2 weeks. I sent the knife FedEx overnight to the prop master. Well, they showed it to Duane Johnson, and his words were, "It's a bit wee." WEE.
Okay.
And I so prop master calls me back and says, "Steve," he said, "Duane Johnson says it's a bit wee." I said, "Okay." I said, "Cool. What are we going to do?"
Right.
Well, we need a bigger one. I said, "Well, all right." I said, "But I've already worked 2 weeks for you. So here's what you're going to pay me for these 2 weeks. And then we'll work out a contract for the other 3 knives." And they said, "Fair enough."
Wow.
So
that's great.
So
I'm surprised there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I couldn't do it any other way.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I couldn't afford to. So they cut me a check for those 2 weeks, and then he and I got to working on what he wanted. And frankly, I am not. The knife is ugly. That one of the problems that Duane Johnson had was that the handle was too short. And I knew he had a big hand. In fact, I had asked for a picture of his hand with a cloth tape measure around the meat of his hand. And his hand was 1/2 inch bigger than mine. If you're looking at your palm, 1/2 bigger than mine, thick wise.
Okay. Yeah.
And I said, well, all right. So a normal knife handle's in that 4.5 range. I'll make it 5 inches, and it's big enough. And so I did that, sent the prototype in, and they said, well, that handle's still too short. And
jeez.
And I was on the phone with, I was in a conference call, and I'm not sure who all was in the room on the other end, but they said, and we want 5 finger grooves, because before it was a smooth handle, didn't have finger grooves. They said, we want 5 finger grooves. And I said, there was a guy in my shop, and he reminds me of this often. I said, I know he's a big dude, but he's only got 4 fingers. And there was this pause, crickets. And I was like, and they said, oh, yeah, I guess you're right. Yeah, you can, yeah. Okay. 4 finger grooves. I said, all right. So I said, look, I'm going to send you templates to give to him. They called him DJ. I said, you give DJ the templates and let him pick which one he wants. So I made up cardboard templates from 5 inches to 6.5 inches in 1/2 inch increments.
Right.
He wanted the 6.5 inch.
I've pulled up an image here. I will include it in the show notes so that people can take a look at it, because I'm starting to see what you're saying, and I know your work, and I'm looking at this, and this is starting to come together a little bit. Yeah.
So I did it. I did the 6.5 inch handle with, I think it's a 16 inch blade. So the whole knife's like 23 inches long, almost 2 feet, and weighed a full 2 pounds. Yeah. 1/4 inch steel. And they wanted, if you've got the picture up, they wanted those little divots on top.
Okay.
It was nothing like the original one I had made.
Yeah.
So
that's production for you.
That's it. You literally have to put your ego aside, because it's not your vision that you're trying to create. Mm-hmm. It's the director's vision. It's not yours. I often explain that the director is painting a picture, and all of us in the crafts, whether it be props or art department or greens or set decoration, we're all paints and paintbrushes, and he's using us to paint his picture.
Yeah.
And it's not my vision of what the knife should look like. It's his vision or hers. And in this case, it wasn't what I make, but if you look at it in the scheme of the movie, it fits. Yeah. It's kind of cartoonish. But it fits in the movie. And so, back to your original point, there is a difference. Yeah. You have to check your ego at the door and make what the production needs to make the picture look the way it's supposed to look. Right.
Because there are hundreds, or if not, thousands of hands, just, not just like yours, but that are all going in on this. I really like your paintbrush analogy there, because that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And it can be frustrating. Yeah. You can work on something for quite a while, and, in Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, Frank's wife Lally and I were were there for several weeks in the prop shop making props. And we learned really quickly that just because we thought it was really, really cool what we had made did not mean that the director was going to think it was really, really cool.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's frustrating. So if you're going to do this work, you've got to decide, okay, it's, you know, I'm not putting this on my table at a show. This is for this movie.
Right.
And, yeah, it's probably going to have my name on it, but everybody knows that it's a prop for a movie.
Yeah. And
in a movie like Jumanji, that big old knife kind of fit.
Yeah.
And truth is, it did not look huge on him.
Right. He's a big dude.
He is a big dude. And in the movie, it looked good. It looked fine. And when he pulled it in the movie, it looked like it fit. Right.
Yeah.
Now I could look at it and I might have stopped it a time or two to pause it to look. The handle was huge. I mean, come on. It was.
You're sitting there with your popcorn and your remote, you know, frame by frame in it.
It was easily 1.5 inches too long on that handle, but it's fine.
Right.
The check's cashed, and there you go.
You're down on your way there.
Yeah.
So is it pretty typically a quick turnaround for something like that? I mean, 4 weeks for 3 knives, especially with that kind of back and forth, you got to be booking it in the shop.
Yeah, you really do. And that's why, you know, you charge more, to a movie production. And it's not the fact that I'm gouging the production. It's that they want 3 knives in 4 weeks. Well, what does that mean? You know, 3 Bowie knives in 4 weeks. That means I'm going to be working overtime.
Yeah.
Right. And I know what prop makers get paid when they're in a prop shop. Right.
Right.
And I know that after a certain amount of time, they're on time and a half.
Yeah.
So if I'm going to work 10 or 12 hours a day in my shop, and it's not my choice, I have to get this out, then I'm going to charge for that.
Right.
And they do pay more. And there is always a deadline. And it's one that you just really can't miss.
Yeah. You
got to hit that deadline. And there may be changes in the middle of it that you have to deal with. So yeah, it's I'm not going to say always, but it is often a short timeline. A good friend of mine, prop master, he was, I think, an assistant prop master on, Piccard Star Trek series.
Okay.
And I was in Gettysburg. Oh, this is a funny story. I probably shouldn't prep it with that because it may not be all that funny, but, I was in Gettysburg, my wife and I, and we're walking. We got there on a Thursday. We were walking to eat, and the show started Friday. And Thursday, I got a call that said, Steve, it's Mike. You have any knives ready? And I said, for what? And he said, well, and he explained he's working his show. And they were in a production meeting, and Patrick Stewart said, shouldn't I have a knife in this scene? And of course, everybody around him went, well, yeah, of course you should.
Well, yeah, you say that to Patrick Stewart for sure.
Yeah, right. And so the props team was like, oh, shoot. All right. So they left the meeting, called me. And I said, well, I happened to be at a show. I happened to have, I think I had 7. I said, I'll send you pictures. But none of them are duplicates. They're all one-offs. And they said, okay. So I sent him pictures. And he said, well, that's really not what we want. And we need 2. I said, all right, what is it you want? You know, they described it. And I said, okay, I know exactly what you're talking about. And Mike said, well, he said, and Patrick wants it to be made out of grapevine wood. I said, I don't even know what grapevine wood is.
Right.
And he said, well, like grapevines, big grapevines that are cut down. And I said, is that a thing? and he was like, well, I guess that's what he wants. And I said, all right. So we do the show. We're leaving on Sunday morning, coming back, and we stop on I-64 just into Kentucky. And on the side of the road, oh, that's the other thing. I said, when do you need it? He said, well, they got to be here by Wednesday.
Oh, my gosh.
No, I'm in Gettysburg.
Right.
So we're coming home Sunday.
You're not working through the weekend here.
No. Well, I've been show, right?
Right.
It's been show doing that.
You've been working that job,
Yeah. So we stop on the side of the road. I run into the woods. I guess people probably thought I had to go to the bathroom, but I ran in the woods with my Leatherman, found a grapevine. And this is spring. This was like April. And there's a huge grapevine, wild grapevine hanging there. Because they're all over Kentucky.
Yeah.
I think Indiana too.
Yep. Same up here.
And so, man, I started cutting on that grapevine. Well, of course, it was green, and the water poured out of that thing. And I'm talking like you turned on a faucet.
Yep.
Because this thing was probably, I don't know, it was probably 4.5 inches diameter, and all I had was a Leatherman, and I was sawing through this section. Long story short, I was soaked. I got this, I don't know, probably 18-inch section of this grapevine, and it was completely white inside.
Right.
It was fairly hard, soaking wet, but it was white. So I get home, I look online. I said, how do I dry this out in a hurry?
In a real hurry.
I put it in the microwave. I cut it into sections. It was miserable. And I fooled with it all the rest of that night, all the rest of Sunday night. Sunday night, I gave up. I said, this is not going to work. I had the water content down to like, I don't know, 20% or something.
Right.
And, it needs to be around 7. So I called a friend of mine who was caretaker of a horse farm, greens guy, does all the trees and landscaping. And I said, do you all cut wild grapevines? Are they a thing you all have to deal with? He said, all the time. I said, do you have any that you cut last year that are still hanging in the trees? And he said, well, probably. So he went out and he found some. Well, Monday morning, early, and I don't get up early except when I'm doing stuff like this, or if I'm deer hunting.
Okay.
So he shows up at the house. He's got a truckload, and some of them were big enough that I could use. So I thanked him, and he went on his way. And man, I started cutting, and I cut into it, and it was dry because I asked him for hanging stuff still in the air, not on the ground.
Yep.
And it was dry, and it was a really pretty color brown. I was really surprised. So I made some slabs. Long story short, I made 2 knives. And there were wormholes, loaded with wormholes.
Yep.
Well, the knives have to match.
Oh,
so
geez.
If there was a wormhole in one, I had to make a wormhole in the other. And so I was putting them side by side and using a little Dremel and chisels and cut little wormholes and drills. And while I'm doing that, here comes a worm out of one of them. Now, this is on the knife, right? This is done. This is glued up, sanded on the knife. Oh, my
goodness. Okay.
And I'm like, oh, crap. So I fill it. I just coat the knife in epoxy. Put epoxy in the holes. I colored it black, put it in the holes, put a thin layer on the outside, wiped it down, and shipped them off. And I called the guy and I said, look, you tell Sir Patrick that if a worm wiggles out in the middle of shooting, it's not my fault. Because he wanted freaking grapevine wood, and that's what he got. And so It worked. They got the knives by Wednesday, and they were in the pilot. And
wow.
So all is good.
Wow.
All is good.
That is a feat. Thank you for sharing that. That's really, that was funny, I think. If you're not laughing, then I don't know what makes you laugh, but
it wasn't funny while I was going through it.
No, that must be horrible.
actually, when the worms started coming out on my completed knife.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
That was kind of funny. I was like, oh dear God.
It kind of caps off the project.
Yeah, it really did. It really did. That's when I decided that epoxy was going to become my friend.
Right. Wow.
And so, yeah.
So how did you go from, we didn't really touch on this, how did you go from Kentucky State Trooper into making grapevine handled knives for Star Trek?
Well,
what was that transition like a little bit? Just so we paint a little bit of that picture.
It was Frank House again.
Okay, we can blame him then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he gets the blame or the credit. And I would certainly say credit. In 99, he did the rifle for Mel Gibson and the Patriot.
Yep.
You've had him on this podcast. And so he did that, and then he was asked, he went down to train Mel and did that. And while he was there, they said, hey, can you stay and work with our armor and help with the flintlocks? And he agreed. And there were, some other people there too that he called in, or the armor did. Not sure how that worked. But when he got back, I was giving him a hard time. He had moved to Bourbon County. He was working on the Trayview house, restoring that house. And I said, Frank, you should have called me. I'd have loved to go and do that. And he said, Steve, you're working full time at the state police. You can't get off for 3, 4, or 5 weeks.
Right.
I said, try me. So fast forward to 2003, I was on the Joint Terrorism Task Force with the FBI, and had been assigned by the state police to go there full time to work on that task force after 9/11. I had only been on the task force for, I don't know, a month in 2003 when Frank called and said, all right, Steve, put your money where your mouth is. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, come, let's go to Mexico, work on a movie. I said, how long do I need to be gone? He said, well, probably at least 4 weeks. I said, all right, hold on. So I talked to my state police boss. I talked to the FBI boss. State police boss said, hey, you're assigned to them now. If it's all right with them, it's all right with us. You got plenty of vacation time built up. You got compensatory time built up. You could be gone 6 months, technically.
Okay.
And the FBI said, well, Steve, it's actually perfect. He said, because we're waiting on your top secret clearance to come through, and it hasn't come through yet. And they had me reading old cases that weren't classified and helping out doing stuff that didn't involve having a clearance. He said, by the time you get back, your clearance will be done and you'll be ready to get to work.
Well, shoot.
And I said, all right, done deal. I'm out. So it seemed like one thing leads to another story. So I told Frank, I said, all right, I'm in, let's go. So he and I, now he had worked, at that point, I think he had only worked the Patriot. And I may be wrong about this, but I think the prop master was the same prop master that hired him, was now with Master and Commander.
Okay.
So that was the connection. So we agreed. We did the deal, and he and I meet in Lexington at the airport, and So at, I don't know, 7 a.m, we get on an airplane and we are headed to San Diego. So I left the house about 6 that morning, got to Lexington. We flew out at 7 or so. We get to San Diego 4 hours later. Of course, there it's only, it's essentially 8 a.m.
Yeah.
Something like that. So we get our bags and we walk out front of the airport there, and here's a Mexican fella because it's filmed in Mexico. A Mexican fella holding a sign that said House Auvenshine. And we looked at each other and said, well, I guess that's us. And he loaded our stuff up in a nondescript white panel van. And we headed south and out of San Diego. And Frank and I looked at each other thinking, boy, I sure hope we're not being kidnapped here. Because there was no markings for the studio. There wasn't anything. So we go across the border, head into Mexico. And sure enough, we end up on the lot, and we tell the driver, I spoke a little Spanish, and I said, we need to go to the prop house. So, okay. So we go to the prop house and open the doors, and we're getting our luggage out of the back. And up comes the prop master, Doug Harlocker. And he's in a golf cart. And he says, throw your stuff in the prop shop. We got to go. And you got to remember now, 6 hours earlier, I'm in Paris, Kentucky, never been on a movie set.
Right.
So he's saying, throw your stuff in there. We got to go. So we load up in the golf cart, and he's flying down through there. And he says, Frank, I think, said, I got to stop. Did Frank tell this story when he was on here?
No, he didn't. No.
Oh, okay. All right, good.
No, keep going.
I didn't want folks to have to listen twice. So Frank said, Doug, what's the matter? He says, well, our cannoneer quit last night. He said, and today is all about cannons. And he said, can you all run the cannons? And Frank said, well, sure. And of course, my eyeballs are getting bigger every second. And I'm looking at Frank, and he kind of looks at me and shrugs his shoulders. You've probably seen that look like,
yep.
Oh, okay.
Here we go.
So here we go. So we get out of the golf cart. Doug runs on into the sound stage, and I grabbed Frank and said, can we run cannons? And he said, they're just big flintlocks. I said, it's fine. I said, all right. So we go into the sound stage, and here's 12 guns, 6 pointing in each direction out what looks like a lower deck of a ship. And it's on a gimbal, so it moves. Mm-hmm. And there's Paul Bettany. Russell Crowe was running around. I don't think he was in this scene, but he was there. And again, 6 hours earlier, I'm in Paris, Kentucky. And now I'm on a sound stage on, at that point, was the biggest movie of the year. And we're running cannons. So that was my trial by fire into the movie business.
Right.
And in retrospect, it was probably the best thing that could have happened to me. No time to worry, no time to be nervous. And I just watched what the other crew did. When it came time to hide, you hid. I knew gun safety. I knew how to run a flintlock. The guns were flintlock mechanism on top, but it was special effects that kicked them back. Okay. And flame out the front. We weren't responsible for that. All we were responsible for was that big flintlock on top. And it worked fine. And Frank was right. We could do it. And that was my introduction to the movie business.
Wow. And then after that, you went back to Terrorism Task Force? I
did.
Okay. Yep. Wow.
Yep. Was there for 4 weeks. Frank had already been there working with him on another piece of the show. I don't remember what that was. but I think Lally was there as well. They were working on some props and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And he had come home, and then we went back. And so he left after 3 weeks. I was there another week or 10 days, finished up second unit work. And then I came home. And as soon as I got home, I went back to work with the Joint Terrorism Task Force.
So what kind of stuff then were you doing after the Cannon Day for Master and Commander?
Just running the flintlocks. We had a ton of gun work. And in retrospect, we didn't have enough people. And we learned that the hard way. At some point, I think we had 175 guns going at one time.
Wow.
And we had to train the extras. And then we had to clean all the guns after every day shooting.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I love muzzleloading, but wow, that's a lot to clean.
Yeah, you better love muzzleloading. If you're gonna, we did have a steam cleaner, which without it we'd have been sunk.
Yeah. Jeez.
And but yeah, it was a huge undertaking, and neither one of us, we've talked about it, neither one of us could do it now. We were young and stupid, didn't know any better.
Yeah.
But that was rough. But what happened after that is there were 3 or 4 property assistants to Doug Harlocker, the prop master. And now each one of those is a prop master in his own right.
Okay.
And so it's kind of a family tree.
Yeah.
And then they started, and they found out on that show. I think it was the first real introduction that we had to them, that we made stuff. Right.
Right.
They'd come up with a prop that they needed made that day or for the next day. And since we were in that 18th century world making stuff, it wasn't hard for us. We had to make a fire starting kit in a hurry. So, we were making char cloth. We were forging, Frank forged a little striker. I stole a kid's Altoid tin, dumped his Altoids on the table. In about a half hour, we had a strike-alike kit. So they found out we could do that stuff. And then we started being asked in subsequent years by these guys to make props, make knives, that kind of thing.
So your most recent picture, I was able to watch, I think last weekend, Pale Blue Eye on Netflix. I got to ask, because there wasn't a whole lot. I was expecting a little bit more as far as accoutrements go in that picture. But what was production like for that? And what kind of things did you end up making for it?
Well, I didn't make anything for that.
Okay.
All I did was Frank and I ran the guns.
Okay.
And there was absolutely zero gunfire.
Okay, that's okay.
Yeah, it was. There was supposed to be, but it wasn't long after the Alec Baldwin incident. And everybody was afraid of gunfire, I think, at that point. And really, the movie wasn't about gunfire. It would have been incidental to the plot. We'd have had cadets in the background in practice. Maybe a 21 gun salute, I think, may have been scripted originally for the funeral scene. There was gunfire originally.
Okay.
But we didn't end up firing a single musket, which was, okay.
Yeah.
If that's what y'all want to do.
Right.
But we were locked and loaded. We were ready to go. We're ready to do it. But basically, we just wrangled cold guns.
Interesting.
And I mean that in two senses. They were unloaded, so they were cold, but it was also freaking cold. So
that wasn't fake snow then?
No. There were a few times they had to add a little fake snow if it, started melting in patches. But there was a lot of very real snow. And it was very real cold.
That's great. I really enjoyed it. And, knowing that you and Frank worked on it and the other stuff that you guys have worked on, it just kind of adds a neat little layer to watching something, to be able to catch some of your work in there and know that you were a part of the production. I think it's neat, as many frustrations I think we have with Hollywood and especially culturally at times in our community. It is nice to know that when it comes down to it, they do bring in people from the muzzleloading community that know what they're doing to make something right. Whether that's, making sure the guns are clean at the end of the day or making a fire starting kit in a day. I think that's really neat. I think it's great that you guys are continuing to do that.
Yeah. And sometimes it works better than others. Some directors are very concerned about historical accuracy. Peter Weir on Master and Commander was very into it. He wanted historical accuracy, and he would defer to us if we had suggestions or something wasn't done a certain way, and we felt like it needed to be right. Yeah, he wanted it to be right. Others, not so much. The old thing we complain about, 14 shots out of a revolver. Sometimes they don't care. Right. They really don't care. They're making a movie and they're just trying to get an image across of this happening. And they don't care if people are counting and saying, well, that gun can't hold but 5, Right. Okay, great. I don't care.
It goes back to that painting that they're working on.
That's it.
It's a feeling.
The opening scene of Crossbones. It was an old NBC series with John Malkovich. That it was in the pilot episode, and I believe it's some of my best work, and Frank's as well. A ton of guns. What I say, going off in an elevator, basically. And there were stunt players and they were good. And, there's a big difference. God bless background actors. We got to have them. But it's like that veritable box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. But with stunt players, you could pretty well rest assured that they're going to have their stuff together. And that crew was great. And we were able, the reason I bring that up is the prop master had brought in a knock volley gun, 7-barrel, 45 caliber, flintlock. They all go off at once. Right. Yeah. We used it Master and Commander as well. Okay. And the problem was in Crossbones, it hadn't been invented yet in the time period we were filming. Okay. And but the director didn't care, and so we used the knock volley gun in that opening scene, and it's an anachronism. It's not right, but he liked it. It looked cool, and thank God Frank was there to keep that thing running. I don't know if you've ever shot the knock volley gun.
I have not.
It is not hard to get them to go off once, but to get them to go off consecutive times is a trick. Okay.
You get the 7 at once, and that's about it for a little while.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you have to clean it between, basically you have to break it down and clean it between each shot. Jeez. And it's got a track way, like flintlock's got a pan and that goes through a flash hole. Well, it's got a pan with a flash hole, but that flash hole feeds down into 7 barrels. Right. And if that's not clean, you'll get barrels not going off. And if you don't then clean those out, now you have powder on top of powder. It's a problem. Right. But we had 2 of them, and Frank was able to we would rotate them. He'd clean one. I'd load the one he just cleaned. He would take the dirty one, start cleaning it. I'd load that one up, the clean one, get it back on set. And we kept, because they have to have 14 takes of everything.
Right. You got to make sure you get it just right.
Yeah. So but we were able to rotate those guns in, and Frank was able to keep them running through, I know, 7 or 8 shots. And to me, it's really impressive.
Right.
And that's something you'll never know or never see. The scene is cool because you got so many guns going off such a tight space. But to me, the trick was keeping that knock gun rolling. And we had guns on 2 different ships. And so I was having to load guns on 2 different ships while Frank's cleaning the knock. And yeah, it was a massive effort.
Wow. So to kind of, I guess, bring it back to, the folks listening, what kind of tips or resources would you point some aspiring craftsmen towards, if they're interested in your work and the kind of things that you do? What can they learn, or where would you point them to learn more, both just about the craft and we'll get into a little bit about you a little bit later.
If we're talking about knife making, then my first and foremost thing is to study. And online stuff is great, but there's nothing better than having a book made of paper in front of you, where you can take notes. If you look at my books, I've got notes and margins. I've got measurements. They're going to be worthless when I'm done. Because I've just dog-eared the pages and written in the margin. It's a mess, but
that's what they're for.
That's what they're for. And the second thing I would say is take a class, or more than one.
Yeah.
And I'd been making knives for years, and taught by one of the best in our world. Frank, but I still learned something every time I'd go to an ABS workshop, like Dr. Badston or Castile or any of these guys. I've been doing it for 20 years and I'm still going to classes and learning cool stuff.
Right.
Stuff I didn't think of, stuff that made my life easier. So there's nothing better than hands-on with somebody that knows what they're doing and enjoys teaching. It needs to be somebody that enjoys teaching, or it's kind of useless.
Yeah.
But those 2 things: study, learn from what other people have done, and take a class. It's not cheap. Classes aren't cheap, but I promise you, in the long run, it will be of great value.
Yeah.
And it will be cheaper in the long run than floundering for years, maybe.
Yeah. I kind of think about a class as kind of an accelerator for a lot of this stuff. Is I can fumble around in my shop and kind of figure something out. But the minute I go somewhere and I'm talking to somebody like you that knows so much more and you can explain something and lay something out, it makes so much so clear so fast.
Yeah, it is an accelerator. And on top of that, I would say, if you're going to take 2 classes or 3 classes, don't take them all from one instructor. Find good instructors.
Yeah. Instructors
that do what you want to do, and instructors that come with the right bona fides or the right recommendations, because everybody does something different. Even Frank and I, I learned from Frank, but he remarks often when we're at shows or we talk that my knives don't look like his. And he has said he's proud of that. He likes that.
Yeah.
And so, I enjoy the Woodbury style. I still make those, occasionally, because I like it. And personally, I think it's got a great aesthetic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I like it. But I also like other stuff. And, you need to stretch your wings a little bit and try something you haven't done before.
I like that. And that's a message that we hear echoed, I think, with just about every artist that we've had on to talk about their work and what they would say to other and up and coming artists. I think that's important that we we learn from, I think it even extends into history, not to pontificate or anything here, but it's important to learn from what has existed and what was, and then kind of go and do something with it. I like that personally. I like learning and studying, and then, seeing where I can take something. So I appreciate that mentality being shared.
Yeah. And like you said, it's an accelerator. It really is. You'll be surprised what you learn. Mm-hmm. You'll be surprised what you didn't know you didn't know.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes it's just like, oh, this was sitting here this whole time and I didn't put these together. This might be something for a different time, but there are quite a few classes in the Indiana, Kentucky, Ohio area. But is there a website or a resource out there for classes in other parts of the country that I might not be aware of and other listeners might not be aware of? Or a place to look for these happening, I guess. That's one of the big questions I get. And I'm able to point people to what's kind of local to us. But if they're in the South or the West, I kind of struggle. And that's something I'm always on the hunt for. Yeah,
I'm right there with you. Obviously we've got Canner's Cave. We've got the Woodbury classes. I do classes in my shop, and I'm sure other makers do too. I'd say for knife work, look at the ABS. And because they have hammer-ins and seminars all over the country. I know they've got them in Alabama and Arkansas, Ohio, certainly, at the Quad State, hammer-in up there. And I know they have them out west as well. So I'm a member of the ABS. I don't ever intend to test for journeyman or master. What they do is not what I do.
Right.
But I do support them, and I enjoy their work. And they've got great classes, and there's benefits from being a member of that organization. And I think some of the classes you still have to pay for, but I think it's cheaper if you're a member. I'm not sure.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, I think that'd be a great resource for knife makers.
Awesome. Yeah. I'll be sure to point some more folks to that. I guess here, as we kind of wrap up too, where can people find you and your work if they've never heard of you and want to check out more of your work and see it, some of the high quality photos and things that you take? Where can people find that?
The best place is probably Instagram. I'm on Instagram at Auvenshines_knives. And on Facebook, it's Auvenshine Custom Knives, I believe is what it is.
Okay, cool.
I try to keep those two pages up to date. And that's the most current stuff. I don't have a website. Instagram and Facebook have done really well for me.
Yeah. That's great.
And I can't complain. So yeah, both of those places probably.
Fantastic. I'll link those in the show notes too for the folks listening so they can check those out.
Okay. Yeah,
and find you there. This is usually generally where I kind of wrap things up, Steve. I don't know if there's anything that we glossed over that you want to talk about. I mean, this is kind of, I'll pass the mic back to you here if there's anything else you'd like to talk about or promote or anything.
Not really. I feel like I've rattled on enough.
You did great. You did a really great job.
This last picture I just did, in Hawaii, Chief of War, with Jason Momoa. That is going to be, of course, I don't know how the editing and all that's going to, I can't sit here and tell you it's going to be a great show. Right.
Right.
Because I don't know. But what I can tell you is what I saw has the potential to be a great show. It's 18th century Hawaii, a lot of flintlocks. It's a pretty gory thing, I think. It's not going to be for the meek, but it's views and vistas we've never seen.
Wow!
It's flintlocks on the Big Island of Hawaii. It's a great story. It's a history that we've never heard of. At least I hadn't. And I felt bad for not having known this history. when I started researching this story, because it's fascinating. It's the flintlocks were introduced to the Hawaiian Islands, and changed the course of history.
Man.
And so the views are fantastic. The photography looks great. A lot of flintlock gunfire, and it should be pretty cool.
I'll have links to just about everything that Steve has mentioned here, as much as I can, at least, in the show notes that go with this episode. Should be in the description for the podcast, the YouTube video, and it will be at the dedicated blog post for this episode at ilovemuzzleloading.com/podcast for you to check out, regardless of when in time you are listening to this. I want to make sure that we have those links in there so you can check this out. Again, check out Steve on Instagram and on Facebook, as well as the ABS. We'll have links to that so you can find out some of these classes, and you can check out some of the other work that might be being done in your area so you can get out there and get hands-on. Along with that, in case you're new to the program or ilovemuzzleloading.com here, I do my best to share as many events and classes that pertain to the topics that we're discussing here on the blog. So you can check those out. You can search for the events or any of the education opportunities there at ilovemuzzleloading.com. If you enjoyed this conversation with Steve and you enjoyed his mentality and hearing about his work, I really encourage you to check out the November-December 2022 issue of Muzzleloader magazine. My buddy Eric Ewing did an entire artisan feature on Steve and his work. Eric really goes into the artist side of Steve's work and some of the stories and influences that are there, combined with some wonderful photography by Rick Lambert. This is not an ad. I know Muzzleloader magazine sponsors the program. I just want to give this shout out here. If you're interested in Steve's work, there is this great article out there by Eric Ewing for you to check out. It's going to give you even more of an insight into Steve and his work and the kind of great guy that he is. That's all I have for you this week. We have quite a few other great episodes, I think, here in the queue for you to check out as we head into 2023 here. Really appreciate Steve and really appreciate all the guests that we had in 2022. I really think you're going to enjoy the episodes we have coming up here in 2023. If you're listening to this when it comes out in kind of late January 2023 here, and you're interested in catching up and chatting with me at a show or an event, I'll be at the Connor Long Rifle Show in Noblesville, Indiana. I think it's February 18th and 19th. And then in March, I will be at the Kalamazoo Living History Show set up and talking with muzzleloading enthusiasts there. So if you see me at either of those events, please pull me aside and talk to me a little bit about muzzleloading. It's one of the main reasons I go to these events now. I enjoy catching up with friends and shopping, for my own personal collection, but it is always nice to catch up with you and hear about the projects that you have going on with your own muzzleloading gear. As always, you can check out more information at ilovemuzzleloading.com. I'm Ethan. I love muzzleloading. Thank you so much for listening. We'll catch you next time.